Okay. I'm realizing one of the big problems with this semester is that I can't push you and harass you on your answers. For most of you, because most of you are not commenting on the blog, and so for most of you, I can't bother you about your answers. So I just have to ask you to think about it if you're even watching this video, which most of you are not. I'm having a good time though. I'm doing this for me. It's one of the things that makes me a different kind of teacher is that most of your teachers, I just enjoy doing. Like I would almost do this by myself. Like I enjoy reading Plato and David Foster Wallace, and I would do it on my own for fun. So I'm having a good time, and I hope you'll come along and join me. Okay, well let's take a look at what we've got here. Okay, so let's take a look at David Foster Wallace is going to continue this discussion. So let's take a look at what he has to say. So bottom of page 2 here. He says, before we go any further, let's acknowledge that the question of whether and how different kinds of animals feel pain, and of whether it might be justifiable, meaning there's a good reason, to inflict pain on them in order to eat them, turn out to be extremely complex and difficult. So you can see he's just like Socrates here, where he says, is it okay to cause pain to animals? And then he says, well, wait a minute, let's talk about, do animals really feel pain, right? This is exactly the kind of thing Socrates would do. He subdivides. So he has a whole paragraph here about sort of animal pain. And justifiable means there's a good reason, right? So you cause somebody pain, but is there a good reason? Right? So for example, my surgeon caused me a lot of pain when he cut into my shoulder to fix my broken bone, but it was justifiable. He had a really good reason for putting me through all that pain, which is that it fixed my shoulder and I can move my arm now. So that's justifiable. But the question is eating animal flesh for fun? And I know it's nutrition, but you could get your nutrition elsewhere from like beans, for example, or tofu. So is it justifiable? He wants to know. So first he wants to talk about the pain. He says it's extremely difficult, complex and difficult to talk about the pain that animals feel. And comparative neuroanatomy is only part of the problem. So neuroanatomy has to do with sort of the neuro is the brain, right? Neurology. My best friend is a neuropsychologist, right? He studies psychology, but from the perspective of like brain science, as opposed to psychoanalysis, which is a different way of looking. He's looking at the mind and not the brain. Ooh, it's a difference, because the mind is like thoughts and ideas, and the brain is like the physical object that's inside the skull that has, pathways and neurons and shit. So he says comparative neuroanatomy is only part of the problem, meaning comparative neuroanatomy, meaning is my brain like a cow brain? Is it like a lobster brain? Because that's complicated. Lobsters are put together a little bit differently than cows are. So let's take a look at that. It's tough to compare. He says comparative neuroanatomy is only part of the problem. It's tough to compare brains. But there's bigger problems too. Since pain is a totally subjective mental experience, we do not have direct access to anyone or anything's pain but our own. That is a scary thing to realize. That you ever hear somebody go, man, you see something bad happens to you and they go, oh, I feel your pain. They don't actually. They can't. There is not a way, if there's pain going on in your body, other people don't experience it. It's only experienced by you. Now you can tell people you're in pain, but they might not believe you. If you've ever been to a doctor's office and said you're not feeling well, and they don't take it seriously, that can be a really frustrating experience because there's no way to prove that you're in pain. You can just tell people you're in pain, and they might be like, that guy's fucking lying. So it's quite difficult. You can't feel. There's no machine you can plug yourself into to feel what another person is feeling. Although I'm sure somebody's working on it. So that's part of the problem. He says, and even just the principles by which we infer that other human beings experience pain and have a legitimate interest in not feeling pain involve hardcore philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, value theory, ethics. So he says, even thinking about other people's pain, like here's an idea. Infer means to sort of figure out that other human beings experience pain, right? And other people have a legitimate interest in not feeling pain. So like the idea that, first of all, you got to get, if you're in pain, you got to get somebody else to believe that you're in pain. But even if you do, how are you going to get them to, why should they care? So it would be very frustrating if you said, I am in pain, and someone said, I don't believe you. But it would be even more frustrating if you said, I am in pain, and the other person said, Why should I care? That has nothing to fucking do with me. And that's why he says that I feel pain. Do I believe you? That question has to do with comparative neuroanatomy, right? Like, how do I know that's true? Is your brain the same as my brain? But the question of why should anybody care that you're feeling pain? Like, so what? What does that have to do with fucking me? He says that involves questions involving metaphysics, epistemology, value theory, and ethics. The ethics, ethics is an easy one. Ethics is the study of what's right and what's wrong. Value theory has to do with is theories involving what should you value. We actually already did value theory in class a little bit. Remember when we looked at the jobs and what jobs you would like to do versus what jobs you think are garbage jobs? That tells you what you value, what your values are. Values are what do you think is important, what do you think is not important. Ethics is doing the right thing versus ethics is the study of how to figure out the right thing versus the wrong thing, and how do you do the right thing? How do you figure out what the right thing is and do it instead of the wrong thing? We've done a lot of ethics in this class. That's the good and the bad horse. Value theory is what's important and what's not important. We've actually done some value theory already because, of course, you will remember that Socrates said writing is not as important as speech. That's value theory. He is saying writing is less valuable than speech. David Foster Wallace mentions two other things. One is metaphysics. Metaphysics is kind of the study of, like if physics is the study of like how physical objects move through space, you may have taken a physics class. Metaphysics is a much bigger sort of philosophical arena. Thanks, Maureen. Metaphysics is a much more sort of complex arena involving things like God and the structure of the universe and people's place in the universe and these kinds of much bigger sort of things. And epistemology, we actually talked about epistemology briefly in class. Epistemology is the study of how do you know shit. Epistemology is an epistemological question is a question that says, well, how do you know? So pain, for example, is an extremely important area if you're studying epistemology, because how do you know other people are actually in pain? They can tell you, but does that actually prove it? Maureen looks concerned. Whoa, epistemology. Value, we're talking about value, theory, ethics, epistemology, and metaphysics. Because David Foster Wallace is being David Foster Wallace, and that's what he does. How do you know animals feel pain? And then number one question, how do you know animals feel pain? And then number two, why should you care? These are the questions raised in the article. All right. Thanks for the drink. Thank you. Okay, so David Foster Wallace is listing off, it's not super important that you know all of this, but he's listing off metaphysics, epistemology, value theory, and ethics. Those are four areas you're going to need to think about, which is sort of what metaphysics is like. What is the universe like? What are the things that... So metaphysics could be like... Actually, I'm not doing that. But metaphysics is like big philosophical questions. Epistemology, how do you know somebody's in pain? Value theory, are humans more valuable than animals? And ethics. If reduced cruelty is an ethical claim, well, if you're going to take that seriously, you probably shouldn't eat animals. So David Foster Wallace says we've got to raise all these kinds of issues: metaphysics, epistemology, value theory, and ethics. Okay, cool. We're looking pretty good. And of course, one of the things with epistemology, how do you know things feel pain, is they have to communicate it to you. Now, your friend could be in pain, and you can tell that they're in pain. They'll tell you, how bad does it hurt? It hurts so fucking much. But animals can't communicate like that. They can't communicate in language, and so it's tougher to know how they experience pain. He says the fact that even the most highly evolved non-human mammals can't use language to communicate with us about their subjective mental experience is only the first layer or additional complication in trying to extend our reasoning about pain and morality to animals, right? So just a simple problem is that we don't know. A lobster can't tell you how bad it hurts to be boiled alive. I imagine it would hurt a lot, but I'm not a lobster. Maybe lobsters feel pain differently. We don't know because we can't ask any lobsters. So that language barrier is a huge issue with animals. And the scary thing is because they can't tell us, it makes it much easier to ignore them and to be like, you don't have to think about it. Whereas if the lobster was like, oh my God, don't put me in a boiling water, you would feel very bad. But animals have trouble making us feel bad because they can't talk. Okay, see you in the next video.